Okay, so welcome to the ASPG Victorian Chapter's third seminar for 2024 on the topic of women's contribution to the Parliament. And before commencing the seminar proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this Parliament House sits and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So my name's Andrew Young, I'm the Chair of the Victorian Chapter of the ASPG and I'm pleased to open this session. Before handing over to Colleen Lewis, and our panel members, I'd like to briefly remind everyone the Australian Study of Parliament Group is a not-for-profit, apolitical entity and includes state and territory chapters, and membership is open to all. The chapter's objectives include forums such as this seminar, informing and educating the public about Parliament, contributing to the process of reform and improvement of parliamentary institutions and the legislative process. The ASPG also has an important purpose of promoting research and writing on Parliament, and at the national level, the ASPG publishes the Australian Parliamentary Review Journal, overseen by an editorial board. And I think, in fact, a couple of our library staff and other staff have some articles just published or about to be published. So if you're not a member and are interested in doing so, please come and see us after the session, either myself or Rachel. Rachel's at the back of the room, waving her hand around, and we're very happy to help you with that. Please note that this seminar is being recorded but not live streamed, so if you have any concerns, please see us at the end of the seminar. We're thrilled that we've been able to assemble such a high-quality panel for this topic, along with our facilitator, Dr. Colleen Lewis, who is a member of our executive. So, why this topic? Well, 2024 is the 100-year anniversary of women being able to run for Parliament in Victoria. So, a bill to enable women to become candidates at Parliament elections was introduced into the Legislative Council by the Honourable J.H. Disney on 15 August 1923. It passed the Legislative Council on 30 October 1923 and received royal assent on 21 March 2024 and was gazetted on the 12th of May. Bridget takes all the bills from here to the Governor for royal assent and normally waits about a week. This was 5 months, so I'm not sure what happened, why there was such a delay.
They had to walk longer in that.
Yeah, that's a very long time between the bill passing both houses and then getting royal assent. So, after that happened, Alicia Katz stood as the Labor candidate for the seat of Barwon in the 1924 election, the first woman to run for Parliament in Victoria. Barwon was held by Nationals member Edward Morley, who ended up winning 5,086 votes to Alicia Katz 2,228, and my thanks to Annie Wright from the Parliamentary Library for that research. So Alicia Katz didn't win, but she was the trailblazer. She was the first woman to run. So I'm going to start by introducing our moderator, Colleen. Dr. Colleen Lewis is an Honorary Professor, Australian Studies Institute, ANU, an Associate of the Centre for Public Integrity and a member of the Accountability Roundtable. Colleen's a long-time researcher into public sector accountability, also a member of our executive. And our panel, in alphabetical order, I'll firstly introduce our three former MPs. In the blue jacket, Donna Hope. Donna is a former member of the Victorian Legislative Assembly, having represented Carrum from 2010 to 2014, and before entering Parliament she served as South Ward Councillor for the City of Kingston and was appointed Deputy Mayor in 2009. While a member of the Legislative Assembly, Donna was also a member of the Innovation Services and Small Business Committee, a member of the Tourism Major Events Committee, Employment and Industrial Relations Committee, a member of the Manufacturing, Exports and Trade Committee, and a member of the Environment and Climate Change Committees and Youth Affairs Committee. Donna was diagnosed with cancer while serving in Parliament, and since leaving Parliament she's continued to fundraise, and advocate for bowel cancer research, and is an ambassador for Bowel Cancer Australia, bowel cancer being Australia's second largest cancer killer. And in 2024, just very recently, in the King's Birthday Honours, Donna was awarded a Medal of the Order of Australia for services to the people in Parliament of Victoria and to bowel cancer awareness. So congratulations, Donna. Donna's currently working as an electorate officer for the member for Mornington, Chris Crowther, and continues to volunteer for Guide Dogs Australia and spends time with her 4 sons and granddaughter. And now, closest to me, Jaala Pulford. The Honourable Jaala Pulford was elected as a member of the Legislative Council representing Western Victoria in 2006 and retired before the 2022 election, and during her time in Parliament she had various ministerial roles, including, and it's a long list so bear with me, Minister for Environment, Minister for Innovation, Medical Research and the Digital Economy, Minister for Small Business, Minister for Resources, Minister for Roads, Road Safety and the TAC, Minister for Fishing and Boating, Minister for Regional Development, Deputy Leader in the Legislative Council. She was also the first woman appointed Victoria's Minister for Agriculture in 2014, which, Jaala, I think included the introduction of medicinal cannabis at one point. And during, I think at about 1 o'clock in the morning during lengthy debate, I looked at you and said, where are we growing it? And you told me, I know where we're growing it, but if I tell you, I'll have to kill you. And I've never forgotten that. It was a moment of light relief needed at about 1 o'clock in the morning during that debate. Prior to entering Parliament, Jaala worked in the union movement, and since leaving Parliament she has been appointed as Vice-Chancellor's Fellow at the University of Melbourne, serves as Chair of MTP Connect, Australia's Life Sciences Innovation Centre. She's Chair of the Children's Cancer Foundation, and she is also a Non-Executive Director at Cyban, a medical device company. Raised just south of Castlemaine, she currently lives in Ballarat with her husband Jeff, son Hamish and 2 adopted greyhounds. Suzanna Sheed, down the end of the table. Suzanna Sheed represented the District of Shepparton in the Legislative Assembly as an independent from 2014 to 2022. She was Chair of the Pandemic Declaration, Accountability and Oversight Committee. Good luck. During a period of great tension and unprecedented time for the state and the Parliament. Susanna was also a member of the Legislative Assembly Standing Orders Committee and the Family and Community Development Committee. She was appointed a member of the Order of Australia in the 2024 Australia Day Honours for her significant services to the people in Parliament of Victoria. Sorry, I was warned we were going to get those bells. And also to the community. I'm going to press on because of time, apologies. A long-time resident of Shepparton, Susanna was a practising lawyer for 35 years, specialising in family law before entering Parliament. She is currently a member of the panel of administrators for Moira Shire. And now to our parliamentary officer on the panel, who is a current, not a former parliamentary officer. So Bridget Noonan. Bridget Noonan joined the Department of the Legislative Assembly in 1999 to work in the Procedure Office, and she subsequently worked in a range of roles within the office. She was appointed Assistant Clerk Committees in 2006, Assistant Clerk Procedure and Sergeant-at-Arms in 2011, and became Deputy Clerk in 2013. In September 2017, Bridget was appointed as Acting Clerk and became Clerk in January 2019. Just the 16th Clerk of the Legislative Assembly in 160 years, and making history as the first woman appointed to this role in Victoria. In October 2022, Bridget was appointed Clerk of the Parliaments, again making history as the first woman appointed to that role. Bridget grew up in the small Wimmera town of, how do you say it, Bridget? Narajua, thank you, which had 89 inhabitants at the 2021 census. But most notably, Bridget is a member of an equally small but more oppressed group, that being the North Melbourne Football Club. Sorry, Bridget, I couldn't help it. Okay, with those lengthy introductions and with the hope that those bells will finish in about 60 seconds, I'll now hand over to Colleen to run our panel session.
I always have to do that. It really has given me great pleasure to be the facilitator of this panel discussion, because we have 4 highly accomplished women who are going to tell us their experiences in getting to the positions that they held or still hold in terms of the Parliament. What I'm going to do is start with a question which I'm going to be asking all 4 panel members to answer, and invite any panel member to comment, or to discuss with another panel member. We like it to be relaxed and interactive, and then I will ask other questions depending on what feedback you give. But to start with, I'd like you to spend about 3 or 4 minutes each highlighting for us what were the most significant challenges you faced as a woman throughout your time in Parliament, as either an officer of the Parliament or as an MP, but importantly, what strategies did you adopt to successfully meet those challenges? So we'll start at the beginning. Jaala, can we start with you, and then we'll go down to Bridget and Donna and Suzanna. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Andrew. It's lovely to be here with you. If not a little strange to be not running down the stairs while that's going on. I've got a couple of mates that have wandered in. So hello, Deputy Premier. Hello, Speaker. And welcome, everybody. So the first thing that sprang to mind when you asked, tell us a bit about the challenges of being a woman in this place. When I was first elected, there really weren't very many toilets. Yeah, and so that's changed. But I think in an environment that had only really started to be a place where women were, en masse, my generation of Labor women were the first to benefit from the now 30 years old affirmative action laws that have been mentioned in the media a little this week. And I think, finding your own voice and finding your own style in an environment where particular styles are rewarded in a particular way is perhaps the greatest. You see the really good politicians, in the news or through your networks or through your experience before becoming a member of Parliament. And it's those that are behaving outrageously and, bombastically. Like, I am as big a fan of Paul Keating as you'd find. But that was just never, ever going to work for me. And I remember hearing very, very early in my career, there's no point in pretending to be someone else because, it just won't work anyway. So, just don't bother. Perhaps that.
Okay, thank you. Bridget.
Thanks, Jaala, and thanks, Colleen, for the question. And I should say it's a bit overwhelming to be here on a panel with three women who I admire so very much, so I'll try to hold my own. I probably have a slightly different perspective as an officer of the Parliament from the other panellists as members. And Colleen, I was really struck by the question about what challenges have you experienced as a woman, and I was like, challenges, and staring into the middle distance, and I thought, at the risk of needing to sort of hand in my feminism card, I thought I actually haven't really had any, which caused me to reflect, well, why is that? And you mentioned, Andrew, being the first woman clerk and the first woman clerk of parliaments, and that for me, that appointment, the attention about being the first woman really carried a lot of mixed emotions for me, because I'm very sensible to the honour of being firstly the clerk of the Legislative Assembly. It's a dream job. Maybe not today. It's an incredible privilege, and it's a real dream job. But I eventually worked out at the time when I was appointed and there was all the focus on me being the first woman, why that made me feel slightly uncomfortable. And it was that there's absolutely no reason why I shouldn't have been, because when I've had a first-rate education straight from Narrabeen Primary School, Horsham High School, Melbourne University, bang, bang, bang. I have always had good physical and mental health. I've got a loving, supporting, mostly normal family. I am, I'm so middle class, I've got subscriptions to the MTC and the Victorian Opera. I can make ottolenghi recipes without looking at a book. I am straight, white, highly educated, middle class, bang, bang, bang. I don't have children, so I've never taken time out of the workforce for caring responsibilities. My parents live too far away for me to care for them, which might be news for my sister who lives around the corner from them. There's no reason that I shouldn't have succeeded. And so I felt that attention on being the first was, it really sent a mixed message to people. Because in some ways, while it's a great privilege, there's nothing particularly extraordinary about it. Which, when I was talking to you, Andrew, about this at the time and trying to wrestle with the attention about it, you very sagely gave me some advice, which was, look, it does matter. It matters to your staff who are watching you. It matters to younger women in this organisation. So think about the role modelling that the role entails. And it matters to members. It does. I'm sensitive to that. So the challenge that I guess I've set myself as clerk and as a department head with varying degrees of success is to get women who are nothing like me onto the pathway for careers in this department. And that's a challenge, but I think it's one that we need to face. Sorry, that was probably more than 3 minutes. See, this is why you should never ask a clerk what they think.
That's fine, Bridget. I'll go on, Donna.
Thanks so much, and it is a great pleasure to join you all here today. Just having a think about some of the significant challenges and being a female member of Parliament. I'm quite similar in that I don't feel like I've had many barriers along the way, but I've also been one to always voice my opinion and speak up, even if it wasn't a popular choice or decision. That, if I felt very strongly about something, I was always going to speak my mind. But I took, when I was elected, I didn't have a lot of political experience. I had been a community volunteer. I had grassroots in my community that I'd lived, having 4 little boys grow up, community volunteer, and had sort of morphed into a council role, and then had the opportunity to stand for a seat with the seat of Karen, which, when we look back, it was a seat that I think neither party expected to win or lose the seat. It was a seat that became, we had a 1-seat majority pretty much, if you look back to that time that I was in Parliament. So I came through a pretty brutal election campaign. I think one of the biggest challenges is winning a seat, and then there's no real instruction manual as to how to become a member of Parliament. You're just thrown into the spotlight and into the political environment. And I was a mum of 4 boys that were 13 to 20 at the time. So just the demands of having a family, representing as a member of Parliament, and having an electorate of 45,000 people at the time. But it was certainly a great privilege, and I had some incredible challenges along the way. The main one was, I thought, being the redistribution. That was a very difficult day when Karen was affected so much with electoral boundaries. I had pretty much inherited another 50% of new territory, and I thought that was the most incredible challenge I had experienced as a Member of Parliament. I was already in a marginal seat. I think my 2.1 became 0.3, and then I was diagnosed with bowel cancer. So character building, certainly a lot of character building at the time, but I was only one of 15 women, and there were 49 men in our Parliament. So, but I was very privileged to have some good female role models and mentors. And one thing is, as a female Member of Parliament, people still come to me and say, look, we're really inspired by you. We've followed your journey, and we've become interested in politics as a result. So I think just absolutely trying to inspire other young women that are coming up through the party and the community as well.
Excellent, thank you. Suzanna.
Thank you. Gosh, it's been an incredible journey from my point of view. I was sitting in my coffee room in my legal practice, having a coffee one day in October 2014, and I think reading the paper and seeing that nobody was coming to Shepparton, nobody was saying anything about Shepparton. There was no investment promised during that election campaign for anything in Shepparton. And we'd had the National Party for 47 years, and I said to a few people, we need an independent, and then I said, well, I'll stand as an independent, and we ran a 29-day campaign, and after the first couple of weeks I started feeling really ill because it looked like I might win, and then and then I did win, and I truly felt ill. I remember waking up the next morning after election night and being absolutely terrified of what I'd done and what I might have to do and what it would all mean. And during my time in Parliament, I would say to other members of Parliament, you're so lucky that you've got a party around you. And they would sometimes look at me and say, be careful what you wish for, Susanna. Which I sort of understood some of the meaning of that. But I think arriving in Parliament at my age and stage gave me, I had a level of confidence as a person, even though I had none as a politician. And within a few days of being elected, I was asked to come in and meet Daniel Andrews, who was then the Premier, and I had a shopping list of all the things Shepparton needed. And on meeting him, I realised I was well and truly old enough to be his mother, and that probably gave me a bit more of a sense of confidence in a way. So I did it because I felt incredibly passionate about what we'd been missing out on for such a long period of time, and that I'd always been an advocate as a lawyer, and I must have had a sense that I could do it. But the best advice I was given was, I think by Ray Purdy, just to go and sit in the Parliament for the first 3 months and see how it works, because I knew nothing, and that was great advice. As the years went on, it was really apparent to me that the people who would help me with all the challenges that I faced were the staff of the Parliament. It was Ray and it was Bridget, and it was, rushing in when the bells rang and not quite being sure what was going on and running over to Bridget and saying, what's going on? And she would say, well, it's a division on this and this is going to happen and you need to decide how you're going to vote, because I had to decide everything. I was the only independent and every decision was my decision, whereas I could lean over and talk to a party person and say, what are we voting on? And they would say, I don't know, because there was only one person in the House who needed to know that answer, although I'm sure a lot of them did know. But that was, those sorts of things, and the isolation of being the only independent during those first 4 years was the biggest challenge. But the best thing about it was the incredible sense of being welcomed by the women, and generally speaking, and that just, and I mean, I think we all experience that when we go into something new, that it's often a woman who you will feel most comfortable with initially, and I certainly had a sense of being welcomed in a way, but also a sense of camaraderie and a willingness to look out for me, and that allowed me to move into a role of wanting to work by collaborating with the government. It was only the government who could help me, so my sense was I need to work with the government, I need to build relationships, and I need to be able to advocate for what I want. Now, I've probably talked much too long, so I'll stop right now.
That's good. Thank you all very much for that. The one thing I'd like to know, a few of you have mentioned that there were so few women when you came into the Parliament, and you're clearly going into a male-dominated culture. But I wondered, in your time there, and I am sort of conscious of time, so perhaps a 2-minute answer, but what cultural change do you think having women in the Parliament have brought to the Parliament itself, to the workings of the Parliament? And I can see that you want to answer that first, Jaala, so please.
So one of the reasons the Labor Party, the women in the Labor Party decided that we needed to change our rules to force ourselves to have more gender-balanced representatives in all our parliaments was because of certain issues. One of them was the decriminalisation of abortion. It wasn't just that. There were a number of other things, including accessible, affordable childcare, better representation of rights at work, all of the things that are less central to the day-to-day thinkings of governments and parliaments that are overwhelmingly male-dominated. And it seems funny to be saying this now because the change in the last 20 years is so profound. But it really was, at the time that I was elected, there were still portfolios that only the women did and portfolios that only the men did in executive government.
Can I just say, what about the cultural change?
Yes, so the cultural change was, I think, very much driven by critical mass. But the example that made me smile and grab the microphone is that when we were having that quite extraordinary period, it lasted a year and then very intensively for probably 3 months, that vote on decriminalising abortion, that all the party lines fell apart and there were groups of women having sneaky little meetings to try and count the numbers. And that was like a massive cultural change because, in politics in Australia, and Suzanna described it well, like the only person who walked in at the division absolutely needing to be sure because there was no one else to rely on, that, you had your vote the way you wanted it. But that was a quite remarkable moment. There were others on other bills and legislation, but that was the first, and that was 2007. And people were breaking down the party lines and, we were checking up and down the corridor to see who was coming. It was that unusual.
Bridget, as being a first and working within the Parliament, as an offer of the Parliament, you will have a particular perspective. So I'd like you to talk for a couple of minutes only, because I am conscious about time, on what you saw as a cultural change within the Parliament.
Sure, and my first 3 minutes really could have been summed up by me saying, look, I like this job because I'm a round peg in a round hole, but part of what enabled me to be that was the legacy set by my predecessor, Ray Purdy. When I was appointed assistant clerk committees, so there are four clerks in the Legislative Assembly, 1 clerk, 1 deputy and 2 assistant clerks. When I was appointed as one of the assistant clerk positions, Ray was the clerk. He had appointed Liz Choate as his deputy clerk. Anne Sargent was the sergeant at arms. And so I joined a majority women executive team that had been talent curated by Ray to, he set that scene. So for me, my first big management job was in a majority woman team, and I just thought that was perfectly normal because that was my entire experience. And I think that composition of that team has changed over time as people have retired and whatnot, but it did set a particular culture from the very get-go about this is how we do things here. And I think I really, every now and then in my career as clerk, I think, oh God, thank God Ray did X, Y or Z in the way that he did, because I've been able to inherit a lot of that culture.
Yes, I must say I was very fortunate too to have a male mentor, and I would never have been able to accomplish what I did without his guidance. So yes, it's, men and women, when they work together, I think can always accomplish a lot in cultural change. But I
actually took it for granted at the time, so I probably need to ring Ray and thank you.
Donna, can you just 2 minutes on just the cultural changes you experienced it?
I sure can. Look, I just picking up on your point about mentors. Robert Clark was my parliamentary mentor, and I think whilst I had some great, strong female members of parliament that were mentors, having someone like Robert that was very experienced was really valuable as well. I can see there's been a really great cultural shift and change in what has, as we know, traditionally been a male-dominated industry. As you know, with our pre-selections and with selection of members of parliament, we have a merit-based system, but I absolutely acknowledge that we need to do a lot more to get a lot more women into Parliament. Some of the barriers can be potentially pre-selections, where you have pre-selectors that believe still that males are best representing their communities. So there's a real cultural change required in some of those pre-selection techniques. But I think one of the really great cultural shifts that we've had that I didn't have when I was a Member of Parliament, we didn't have family-friendly hours. In the Assembly, we would, and Bridget will remember this, we would sit, we wouldn't adjourn sometimes until 1 a.m. in the morning. And that was a real barrier for people that had to travel home to be with their families, to put their other hat on, to be, to come back and travel to Parliament the next day. So I think that has been a terrific initiative, that there's now family-friendly hours in Parliament, and Parliament adjourns at a much more decent time as well. But I might leave it there and hand on.
Yeah, Suzanna, yes, and if you just sort of focus on that cultural shift for me, please. Yeah.
In 2003, I joined the RACV board, which had 15 men and 1 woman. And I so noticed the cultural change that occurred then. You'd arrive for the board meeting and there'd be a big lunch and red wine and, all of this before the meeting started, And so it was extraordinary in that setting to see how, as more women came on, the attitudes and the behaviours really changed. There was a very significant cultural change that I observed over a number of years, and I was on that board for about 12 years. When I got to Parliament in 2014, there were already so many women there that it was very comfortable, and I didn't have that sense of, gee, I'm in a male world here, and I'd experienced that as a young person doing law. So it seemed that so much of the hard work had already been done by the women who had gone before. And I was also pleased to see that we didn't have to pretend and behave like men, that women could be women and debate in the way that they wanted to debate. And I mean, occasionally, you'd see things get really heated and perhaps very loud in a way that you might think men would behave more than women. But generally speaking, I think an environment had already been created that made it, for me, seem like the hard work had already been done. And when you think about, the women, the suffragettes and what they went through and the people who died to allow us to be here and to actually have the experience of representing our communities, it's a great privilege. Yeah.
Yeah. And considering we're about 51% of the population, you wonder why it took so long. But we're getting there, ladies. We're getting there.
We know the answer.
Yes, we will. Look, I want to be able to give enough time for people in the audience as well. So I'm just going to ask you all one last question. If you, I'd just like to know what advice, maybe just 2 or 3 things, but what advice you would give to women who aspire to be either senior officers of the Parliament or members of Parliament. Just really, if you can narrow it down to about 3, but with all your experience, it'd be really interesting to hear, if you were mentoring these women, what would you say to them?
Definitely do it. It is an excellent thing to do. Find your tribe. Doesn't need to be just the girls, but find your tribe, because without it, it's a really lonely business. And know that everybody else has terrible imposter syndrome too. It's not just you.
Yes, good one, good one.
That's out of the bag now, Jaala. Jeez. I would steal Jaala's advice from earlier about you can only be yourself, so don't try to be anyone else. And I wouldn't be a good trained historian if I didn't also remind people to always also, as well as looking forward, have an eye on the rear vision mirror and build on the successes of those who've come before, because I'm very conscious that there have been women working in the Department of the Legislative Assembly for a very long time before the department even included them on staffing lists, and in all sorts of, we're talking the 40s, but I know, and when I reflect on the experiences of women who were recruited to the typing pool in the 1950s on successive short-term contracts with no superannuation and no capacity for advancement, and spent 30 or 40 years of their working life in that situation, and may have subsequently had a reputation for being a bit grumpy. I thought, well, do you reckon? But they were the women, I think, who did the really hard yards for people like me to be able to have the career that I've had, and it would be very remiss of me not to acknowledge that they got there first. They were the real firsts. We were talking earlier about the challenge of being first. They were the real firsts and did the really hard work.
Good.
Oh, sorry, you've got your own microphone. I'm wanting to hand it to you.
Don't hesitate to lean on mentors and role models. I think that's really important, and just to embrace any training opportunities that you have, that come your way. It's okay not to know everything. It's absolutely okay not to know anything, and to try, if you can, and I know it's a bit cliche, but social media can be pretty vicious, especially if you're in a position of being a member of Parliament, not only for yourself but for your family. Even your children, it's difficult to protect everyone from some of the things that are said on social media. So just to try and limit exposure to that, or don't take it to heart, because it can be pretty soul destroying at the time. I think that's probably some good advice.
A bit like Jaala, I think, be brave, and because it is very daunting. So, but definitely do it, because if you've got that passion to enter the Parliament and to represent whoever, I think you need to be brave, and two, you need to be passionate. And I think the staff you have around you, as an independent, the staff that I had became really important to help support me. And of course, you do need family support. And as a country MP, all the driving and the being away from home for so long, and all of those things are an added burden. But again, I joined in that 2014 Parliament when the rules changed and became family friendly. That was a dramatic change. And I remember there were people sort of complaining that this was perhaps happening for the women, like it's women's business, the whole family thing. But it was so good to see. And I later remember hearing men say, I can get home in time to tuck my kids into bed, So that... The change in culture affected everyone, but I think it's to advise someone who really wants to do it. I think you've just got to encourage them and help them as much as you can to get there.
Thank you all. From what you've said, I can see it with women, and I know this from myself and some of my close friends who are highly accomplished. Imposter syndrome is something I think that a lot of women suffer from, and I often wonder what we need to do about that, because you never quite sometimes feel that you're doing what you should be doing. But the nice thing is that a lot more men now are aware of the benefits that women bring to, so it's not so much a pushback as it once was. But clearly, Donna, from what you said, we need to go back a step to pre-selection. And do something at that level. And that's really up to political parties, isn't it? We have independents who go forward, but political parties need to be looking at that too. Look, I think we've only got about a quarter of an hour left, so I'd like to open up for questions. Now, I know I say this every time I'm facilitating, but I'm going to say it again. Because there might be lots of people wanting to ask questions, could you just ask one question? And if there's any spare time and you want to ask another, put your hand up again, and not a double-barreled one. And we haven't got a lot of time, so you can't have a long time with the preliminaries. So if you could just try and think of the questions you want to ask. And as I said, if we have time, I'm more than happy to come back a second time. But and don't be shy, please. Don't, Be the first one, go on for the women. Be the first one to put your hand up and ask the question. Yes, Julia.
Sorry about that. Just very quickly on imposter syndrome, I watched the Trump-Harris debate this morning, and I just think maybe some men need a little bit more imposter syndrome. The question I actually wanted to ask was, do you think there are any structural impediments still remaining that stand out for you as needing correction?
Oh, please, yes, we can. You start, yeah.
This is tricky because we're a Westminster Parliament, and the way our system of government and accountability for the executive works is inherently combative. But that continues to be a challenge for culture. I saw a quite dramatic shift in culture when, in my third term, and then it happened in the fourth, and then it's happened in this term, the people of Victoria and the voting system that we have returned very, very big crossbenchers in the upper house. Like it's 1 in 4, basically. And suddenly you had like votes that you could shift with your language and your arguments in the room, which was a whole novelty. And so, but what people see on the television is the fight. What is rewarded is the aggressive behaviour from the women and from the men, and how you can continue those strong rules of accountability whilst not rewarding like really quite unpleasant behaviour, the kind of behaviour you would never take out into the community, the kind of behaviour you'd never put on display if you thought your mum was watching. That's a real challenge, and there's probably a kind of interesting standing orders, sessional orders question about how you turn it down without taking away what is inherently needing to be very pointed and effective.
I spoke at the start about some of or my approach as clerk about looking at the department and trying to clear any barriers or address any barriers for staff. And I think none of those are insurmountable because of our industrial framework. I think for staff it's the easy bit. I think the real challenge is for members, because we kind of pretend that it's a normal job with a normal industrial context, and it's just not. Members don't have leave, they're never off duty. There's a really interesting thing going on, I think, in the Welsh Parliament, where there's a committee inquiry looking at whether members can job share, because I think I think all of the things that benefit me and my staff in our workplace just aren't available to members. Flexible hours, those sorts of things, and I think that's probably really having a look at the work of an MP and is it a vocation or is it a job, and trying to clear some of those barriers. But that's people could do PhDs on that.
One thing that people often speak to me about is the financial barrier of standing as a Member of Parliament, especially if you're having to take, you need to nominate to stand for a pre-selection, you need to produce material, campaign, take time and leave from your job. So the actual financial barrier of, if there's a really strong candidate, that is preventing quite a few people putting up their hand to run. And people have spoken to me before about that. So I think looking at financial considerations, whether both political parties can look at ways that they can support up-and-coming candidates better, I think is a really good conversation to have. And I do love, I have to say, there's been some great changes since I've been here, but there's now a family room, which is really lovely, where I know some people will breastfeed there, or I do know that some parliaments around the world are even looking at having their own ELCs or creches as part of a parliamentary precinct to really encourage, mums and dads that have to care for their children, so that that is definitely a barrier, and I'm loving seeing lots of pregnant members of parliament around having babies. So I think, you know, there's some great ways that we can look at reducing barriers to encourage more people to contribute.
The issue, as I see it, is not so much within the parliament as with the media, and I'm horrified at the way media in this country has become so consolidated, and that especially if you live in a regional area, we have no news anymore, we have nobody telling our stories, and we have nobody really reporting on what happens in Parliament in a local sense, or feeding anything back in. We have no one reporting on what happens at local government council meetings anymore, and all of that drives dysfunction and disinformation and misinformation, and it makes the jobs of the politicians so much harder. And I think we've always taken the view that the media, newspapers and the like are such an important part of the, you know, the fourth estate and all of that, but we've never required them to be honest or ethical or, you know, all those words that really would matter. And so in terms of any structural change, you know, I just dread the loss of the ABC in a regional area. Sky News is now streamed into the whole of regional Australia for free. If you live in the city, you have to subscribe to a streaming capacity. But in regional Australia, it has it's all pervasive. It's there all the time, and I just see such change in the way people are thinking and behaving because of that, and that is, to me, one of the most fundamental areas we need to be looking at in terms of the functioning of our parliament and our democracy in the future.
Yes, I tend to agree with you about the media. It's probably a good topic for the ASPG seminar at some stage, because it is so important, and there seems to be a bit of a lack of accountability in terms of the media. So that's something. And they will always tell you it's the fourth estate, they have to have freedom, but, you know, there should be some guidelines there. Look, just a question. When you're talking about, Jaala, about the sort of aggression and that goes on in the parliament, this is a weird idea, but I often wonder whether the idea of the word opposition is part of the problem. So rather than having I think it's Her Majesty's or His Majesty's Loyal Opposition, I think is the full correct title. But what if it just suddenly became an alternative government or alternative policies or something? Because I really do get concerned about that word. We've got to oppose, we've got to be aggressive, we've got to be... And talking, Bridget, of the Welsh Parliament, when I was there few years back, and they don't have the opposition there and the government here, so many sword lengths apart. They just mingle. Different parties sit next, you know, you actually sit, a Labor person actually sits next door to somebody from the Conservative. Wow. Now that'd be an interesting thing for women to champion for cultural change. Look, I think we've got time for another question, and Andrew, yes, please. No, I can't see any other hands up at the moment.
Okay. Particularly to the former members, many of your comments tonight have probably surrounded the experience at Parliament House, and I just wondered if there's any reflections you've got on what you experienced out in the electorate. You've got less, I suppose, of the protective infrastructure of this building. There's obviously the well-known unfortunate phenomenon of violence against women in politics. I wondered if you've got any experiences of that, or any reflections, or if perhaps you found, in fact, it wasn't so much of a problem.
So my advice, probably to anybody seeking elected office, is turn the notifications off on all your social media accounts and go to them on your own terms. So not when you're just about to go to bed or not when you're having your breakfast, but when you actually, kind of go to them mindfully. I did that in about year 2 of being a minister, and that would be then year 10 of being a member of parliament. And my goodness, did it declutter my mind. So instead of somebody telling you what a insert various expletives you are, when you were tired or busy or trying to drop your kids off at school, that just wouldn't happen. You could just magically make it all go away. But then you could go into it, and I was kind of a pretty enthusiastic supporter of social media as a means of communicating with the electorate in its early days. It's pretty toxic cesspool that's not conducive to great debate these days. I'd probably suggest to people kind of give it, you do just as well to give it a miss. But there was a period where it was a very effective tool. But you go to it the way that you would go to your pile of correspondence or you'd go to your email. As like I'm on, and this is the bit of the job that I'm doing now. So I think there's that. On the question of it's culture, it's not like it is in here out there in the actual rest of the world. Like, it's just not. Yeah, I know, right? It was just not a thing. Like, when I was the first female minister for agriculture, everybody was all very polite. You get a few funny looks like, oh, geez, you're a bit different to the last fellow. And the other 48. But no, I think the people in the community are completely relaxed about being represented by women these days, and probably have been for quite some time.
I'll sit this one out.
Okay. Donna.
I have to say I was very jealous. I would have loved the fishing portfolio. Having 4 boys, I was a fabulous fisherwoman. So, look, one thing I have noticed is the Parliament has a lot better procedures in place now to give protection to members of Parliament from a security perspective. But we were, I was here 2010 to 2014. So in that decade, and now working with Chris Cruther, I really can see that the Parliament and the machine behind a member of Parliament have actually put some great procedures in place and security procedures, much better security at electorate offices. So that's terrific. As an MP and a marginal MP, I mean, I would often answer the phone in my electorate office or open mail, and I'm sure, I hope not many members of Parliament have that happen, but I opened a few letters one day, and there was a death threat in there, and it's just the reality of representing people that don't have the same view as you in the electorate. But obviously, totally unacceptable. But now, I think back then we just threw it in the bin. But now, if you ever open any threatening or intimidating mail, there's a procedure in place through the Parliament. But I don't have, I felt really safe going out into the community. Being part of the community, I think, was really important, because you could, I'd been there all my life, and most of the time we were welcomed.
I think during the pandemic was the time that I noticed such division and such deep feeling and such anger in the community, and at times I felt frightened because of that, and I suppose I probably copped it a bit on social media and in various ways, not so much because I was chairing that pandemic committee, but just because during that time I had never seen such heightened emotion in the community, and that to me was somewhat frightening. And I remember, I don't think we missed a day of Parliament during the pandemic. We sat every day Parliament was to sit, but I remember, I just remember some of the really creepy feelings about the lockdowns and, you know, driving home from Parliament to where I was staying in Carlton and driving down Brunswick Street one night and it was completely empty and dark. And so my memories of those pandemic years were that I felt really anxious about where we were heading and what this would all mean, and about how people were coping and about how I was coping, and I just had this really heightened sense of anxiety and tension throughout that time that you know, fortunately has subsided, but that will live with me forever.
Yes, 1 minute.
I'm conscious that there's very little time left, that we've got an audience in the room and that this is being recorded for publication on the website. And while all of those things are absolutely true and valid, and while, Suzanna, you're reflecting on a particularly stressful time for the entire community, the entire global community, there's lots of correspondence from lovely people trying to make their community better, safer, stronger, happier, healthier. There's, you know, people come in and say, hey, I'm a foster carer, I've been doing this for 35 years. People come and say, hey, you know, I want to organise some volunteers for the sporting thing, or I want to talk to you about, you know, some street lighting. And it's actually a really excellent and joyful experience, vastly, vastly more than it's not. I just didn't want us to finish on that tone because that was horrible and it was really hard. But it's actually not what it's like almost all the time, most days in this role, in a role like the ones that we've had are excellent.
Thank you for that, Jaala, that's lovely. And thank you also to Julia and to Andrew for the questions. I'm going to hand back, but it was a real privilege to be able to facilitate with such wonderful women as you all are.
And also thanks to Colleen for moderating.